The hallways of Preston Academy always seemed bigger after the students left for the day. Sofia Rodriguez liked this time the best, when the fancy private school became quiet and she could hear her own footsteps echo against the polished marble floors. The 13-year-old girl walked carefully behind her father, Miguel, who pushed his cleaning cart with the same care he did everything else in life. "Papa, can I clean the music rooms today?" Sofia asked, already knowing his answer would be yes. It had become their routine over the past few months. Miguel smiled at his daughter, the skin around his eyes crinkling with warmth. "Of course, Mia. Just be careful around those instruments. They cost more than our apartment," Sofia nodded seriously. She understood the value of things. Her father had taught her that lesson early in life. Every afternoon after her own school let out, Sofia would take the bus across town to help her father with his evening shift at Preston Academy. Miguel had been the head janitor there for nearly 15 years. The prestigious school, with its ivy-covered brick walls and stained glass windows, was a world away from their small two-bedroom apartment in the east side of the city. But to Sofia, these evening hours in the empty school had become a kind of home too. The music wing was her favorite. Unlike the cold science labs or the stuffy library, the music rooms felt alive even when empty. Something about the way sound lingered there, as if the notes played during the day had seeped into the walls. "I'll start with the orchestra room," Sofia said, taking the smaller vacuum from her father's cart. Miguel nodded, checking his watch. "I'll be in the main hallway. Don't forget to dust the shelves too." Sofia waited until her father's footsteps faded before entering the orchestra room. The large space smelled of wood polish and rosin. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, music stands scattered about from the day's rehearsal. She set down her cleaning supplies and walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, running her fingers lightly over the backs of chairs. At the front of the room, behind a velvet rope, stood the school's prized possessions, a collection of string instruments displayed in glass cases. The centerpiece was a violin that the plaque described as a Stradivarius replica, 1721 model. Sofia didn't know what that meant exactly, but she knew it was special from the way Mr. Bennett, the orchestra director, talked about it during the school tour she'd once overheard. Sofia started her cleaning routine, but her eyes kept drifting to the violin case. After finishing with the vacuum, she approached the display. The case wasn't locked. Why would it be? The students knew better than to touch it without permission, and no one else came in here after hours except her father and her. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sofia carefully opened the case. The violin inside gleamed under the room's lights, its reddish-brown surface polished to perfection. It looked smaller up close, delicate but somehow powerful. Her heart beat faster as she looked over her shoulder, confirming she was still alone. "Just once," she whispered to herself. With trembling hands, she lifted the violin from its velvet bed. It was lighter than she expected. Sofia had watched enough students during practice to know the basics of how to hold it. She tucked it under her chin, the way she'd seen so many Preston students do, and held the bow awkwardly over the strings. When she drew the bow across, the sound that emerged was awful, a screeching, scratching noise that made her wince. She quickly put the violin back in its case, her face burning with embarrassment even though no one had heard. "That's not how you hold a bow." Sofia jumped, nearly knocking over the display. In the doorway stood a thin, elderly man with wild white hair and glasses that magnified his dark eyes. He wore the gray uniform of the school's maintenance staff. She'd seen him around, Mr. Lee, who fixed things that broke and tuned the pianos. "I'm sorry," Sofia stammered, backing away from the case. I didn't mean to." Mr. Lee walked into the room, his movements unhurried. "You want to learn?" The question caught her off guard. "Learn what?" "The violin." He gestured to the case. "You come here every day and look at it. I've seen you watching the students practice too." Sofia felt her cheeks grow hot. "I was just curious. I'm sorry for touching it." Mr. Lee studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "Wait here." He disappeared through a door at the back of the room that Sofia knew led to a storage area. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a case that looked worn around the edges. He set it on a nearby table and opened it. Inside was a violin that looked nothing like the gleaming one in the display. This one was scratched in places, its color duller, but it still had a kind of quiet dignity about it. "This was my first teaching violin," Mr. Lee said. Many students learned on this before the school bought new ones. He lifted it carefully and handed it to Sophia. Hold it like this. He showed her how to position it properly on her shoulder, how her chin should rest on it, how her left hand should support the neck. Then he took her right hand and arranged her fingers on the bow. Now try, he said. The sound was still rough, but not the horrible screech from before. Mr. Lee nodded, seemingly satisfied. You have good hands, he said. Strong but gentle. Important for violin. Sophia carefully handed the instrument back, a strange feeling swelling in her chest. Thank you for showing me, but I could never… Never what? Learn to play. Not really. She gestured around the room. These kids have been taking lessons since they were little. Their parents pay thousands of dollars for them to come here. Mr. Lee put the violin back in its case. My father was a rice farmer. We had no money for music lessons. But I learned. How? I cleaned the local music teacher's house in exchange for lessons. He smiled at her. Sometimes there are other ways. Sophia thought about this as she finished her cleaning. When her father came to check on her an hour later, she had a question waiting. Papa, do you know Mr. Lee well? Miguel looked surprised. How? Yes, he's worked here almost as long as I have. Why do you ask? Does he really know how to play the violin? Her father laughed. Know how to play? Amnesia. Before he came to America, Mr. Lee played in one of the biggest orchestras in China. He's a master. Sophia's heart skipped. Then why does he work here fixing things? Miguel's face softened. Life is complicated, Sophia. Sometimes people have to leave behind the things they love when they start over in a new country. But Mr. Lee still has music in him. I hear him playing sometimes late at night when everyone else has gone home. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the feeling of the violin under her chin, the way the bow felt in her hand. It had only been a few moments, but something about it had clicked into place inside her, like finding a puzzle piece she hadn't known was missing. The next day, she rushed through her own schoolwork, anxious for the final bell. On the bus ride to Preston Academy, she rehearsed what she would say to Mr. Lee if she saw him again. But when she arrived, her father had news. Mr. Bennett wants the orchestra room spotless for tomorrow, Miguel told her. They're having some important showcase and parents will be touring the facilities. Sophia nodded, hiding her disappointment. I'll make sure it's perfect. The orchestra room was messier than usual. Sheet music was scattered across the floor, and someone had spilled coffee on one of the rugs. Sophia worked methodically, all the while glancing at the door, hoping Mr. Lee might appear. Just as she was finishing, she heard footsteps. But instead of Mr. Lee, it was Mrs. Harrington, the stern-faced assistant music director, accompanied by two other teachers Sophia didn't recognize. Oh, Mrs. Harrington said, noticing Sophia. You're Miguel's daughter, aren't you? Sophia nodded, suddenly self-conscious in her faded jeans and simple t-shirt. Yes, ma'am. I'm just finishing up here. The teachers walked around inspecting the room. One of them ran a finger along a shelf and nodded approvingly at the lack of dust. At least the help is thorough, the woman said, not looking at Sophia. Mrs. Harrington nodded absently, then noticed Sophia looking at the violin display. Something in her expression changed. Do you like music, girl? Yes, ma'am, Sophia answered quietly. Have you ever played an instrument? Sophia hesitated, thinking of her brief moment with the violin yesterday. No, ma'am. Mrs. Harrington exchanged a look with the other teachers that Sophia couldn't quite interpret. Well, perhaps tomorrow you can show us what you can do. I don't understand, Sophia said, confused. We're having a little event. Some of our students will be demonstrating their skills for potential donors. Wouldn't it be interesting to have you participate as well? A little contrast, shall we say? Before Sophia could respond, the teachers were already walking away, laughing quietly among themselves. She stood frozen, vacuum in hand, a strange mix of excitement and dread filling her stomach. Later, as she walked with her father to the bus stop, Sophia finally asked, Papa, do you think someone like me could ever learn to play like the students here? Miguel looked down at his daughter, at her serious eyes so like her mother's had been. Sophia, listen to me. Those children in there, they have many advantages that you don't. But you have something many of them don't have. What's that? Hunger, he said simply. When you really hunger for something, you find a way. That's how I came to this country. That's how I've kept you fed and in school since your mama died. Hunger makes you creative, makes you work harder. Sophia thought about this as they rode the bus home, as the fancy neighborhoods gave way to their more modest one. She thought about Mr. Lee and his farmer father, about the feeling of the violin in her hands. That night she made a decision. Tomorrow she would find Mr. Lee again, and she would ask him to teach her whatever it might cost. The next morning Sophia woke before her alarm. She had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of violins and music and Mrs. Harrington's strange invitation. Outside the sky was still dark, but she got up anyway, careful not to wake her father, who wouldn't start his shift until afternoon. In the kitchen, she made herself a simple breakfast of toast and eggs, eating slowly as she watched the sun rise through their small window. Their apartment wasn't much, but the morning light made the worn furniture look almost pretty, casting a golden glow over everything. At school, Sophia couldn't focus. Her teacher, Ms. Patel, had to call her name twice during math class. "Earth to Sophia," Ms. Patel said, not unkindly. "The polynomial isn't going to solve itself." "Sorry," Sophia mumbled, her cheeks heating up as her classmates snickered. During lunch, she sat alone as usual, picking at her food while sketching a violin in her notebook. She'd looked up pictures online that morning, trying to memorize the parts. If she was going to talk to Mr. Lee again, she wanted to sound like she knew something, anything. The afternoon bell finally rang, and Sophia rushed to catch her bus to Preston Academy. As the city passed by outside the window, she rehearsed what she would say. "Mr. Lee, I want to learn. I can clean your house like you did with your teacher. Or I can help tune the pianos, or..." But when she arrived at Preston, the usual calm of the after-school hours was missing. The parking lot was filled with expensive cars, and people in formal clothes were entering the main building. Sophia found her father in the entrance hall, dressed in his best uniform, directing a team of other maintenance workers. "Papa, what's happening?" she asked. Miguel looked stressed. "The showcase was moved up. It's happening tonight instead of tomorrow. The school board decided to combine it with a fundraising dinner." He handed her a cloth and spray bottle. "We need to keep everything spotless while the guests arrive. Can you handle the windows in the main corridor?" Sophia's heart sank. "But Papa, I need to find Mr. Lee. It's important." "Hal called in sick today," Miguel said, already turning to address another worker. "Whatever it is will have to wait, Mia. This is a big night for the school." For the next hour, Sophia cleaned windows and picked up trash, all while watching the parade of wealthy parents and donors arriving in their fine clothes. The women wore jewelry that caught the light, and the men's shoes were so shiny Sophia could almost see her reflection in them. As she worked her way toward the music wing, she overheard snippets of conversation. "Flying. In a conductor from Vienna next semester, offered early admission to Juilliard, youngest concertmaster in the state." The words swirled around her like leaves in the wind, bits and pieces of a world she could barely imagine, a world where children didn't ride city buses alone or help their fathers clean up after other people. When she reached the orchestra room, Sophia found it transformed. The chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a small stage that had been set up at the front. The instrument display had been moved to a more prominent position, lit dramatically from above. People were already filling the seats, chatting excitedly. "There you are." Sophia turned to find Mrs. Harrington standing behind her, wearing a severe black dress and pearl earrings. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't show up for your big moment," the teacher said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "My moment?" Sophia repeated, confused. "Why, yes. I told you yesterday you'd be participating in our showcase. In fact, you'll be our special surprise guest." Mrs. Harrington took the cleaning supplies from Sophia's hands and set them aside. "Come with me." Before she could protest, Sophia was being led through a side door into a small room where several students in formal black attire were warming up with their instruments. They looked up when she entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. "Everyone," Mrs. Harrington announced. "This is..." "I'm sorry, what was your name again?" "Sophia," she said quietly. "Yes, Sophia, she's going to be joining our program tonight." Mrs. Harrington turned to a tall boy with sandy hair. "Thomas, be a dear and lend Sophia your backup violin. She'll be playing right after Isabel." The boy looked Sophia up and down, taking in her worn jeans and simple t-shirt. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Mrs. Harrington said, that strange smile still on her face. "Our donors will love it. A real rags to riches moment in the making." Thomas shrugged and went to retrieve a case from the corner. He returned and thrust it at Sophia. "It's already tuned," he said. "Try not to break it." Sophia took the case, her hands shaking. "Mrs. Harrington, I don't know how to play. I've never—" "Oh, don't worry about that," the teacher cut her off. "No one's expecting a performance worthy of Carnegie Hall. Just do your best. It's all about showing our donors the diverse community we serve." With that, Mrs. Harrington swept out of the room, leaving Sophia standing awkwardly among the Preston Academy students, who had already turned back to their preparations. Dismissing her from their attention, Sophia opened the case. Inside was a violin similar to the one Mr. Lee had shown her, though newer and more polished. She lifted it carefully, remembering how he had positioned it. "You're holding it wrong," said a girl's voice. Sophia looked up to see a student watching her. The girl had dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and wore glasses with thin gold frames. "I know," Sophia admitted. "I don't actually know how to play." The girl, Isabel, Sophia guessed from what Mrs. Harrington had said, raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you in the showcase?" "Mrs. Harrington invited me. I'm the janitor's daughter. I help my father clean after school." Understanding dawned on Isabel's face, followed by something that looked like disgust. But it wasn't directed at Sophia. "That's low even for her," Isabel muttered. She glanced at the door, then back at Sophia. "Look, I don't have time to teach you anything real, but at least let me show you how to hold it properly so you don't look completely ridiculous." For the next few minutes, Isabel gave Sophia a crash course in basic violin posture. How to stand, how to hold the instrument, how to position the bow. "Don't actually try to play anything complicated," Isabel advised. "Just draw the bow across the open strings, like this." She demonstrated, producing a clean, pure tone. Sophia tried to copy her, but the sound that emerged was scratchy and uncertain. "Well, it's better than nothing," Isabel said with a sigh. Before she could say more, a bell rang somewhere in the main room. "That's the 5-minute warning," Thomas called out. "Final tuning, everyone." Isabel gave Sophia one last look. "Good luck. You're going to need it." The students filed out, leaving Sophia alone with the borrowed violin. She tried once more to produce a decent sound, but her hands were shaking too badly now. What had she gotten herself into? She should find her father, tell him what was happening, ask him to take her home, but even as she thought it, she knew she wouldn't. Something in her wanted to go through with this, even if it meant embarrassment. At least she would have held a real violin on a real stage, even if only as a joke. From the other room, she could hear Mrs. Harrington's voice, amplified by a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for Preston Academy's Spring Showcase. Tonight, our most talented students will demonstrate the results of our world-class music program. But before we begin, I have a special announcement." Sophia moved closer to the door, listening. "As you know, Preston Academy prides itself on excellence, on tradition, on maintaining the highest standards. But we also recognize the importance of community outreach, of providing opportunities to those less fortunate." A murmur went through the crowd. "That's why I'm pleased to announce a new initiative, the Preston Academy Community Scholarship. And to demonstrate our commitment to this program, we have a special guest performer tonight, someone who represents the very students we hope to reach." Sophia's stomach dropped. This was what Mrs. Harrington had planned all along, to parade her in front of these wealthy people as some kind of charity case, to let her embarrass herself for their entertainment, all while the teacher patted herself on the back for being so generous. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage, Sofia Rodriguez. A spotlight suddenly hit the door where Sophia stood. The crowd applauded politely, their faces a blur beyond the bright light. Sophia felt frozen, the violin heavy in her hands. From the corner of her eye, she saw her father enter the back of the room, a confused expression on his face as he realized what was happening. "Sophia?" Mrs. Harrington prompted, her voice sharp despite the smile she maintained for the audience. "Don't be shy." Sophia took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The applause died down, replaced by an expectant silence. Mrs. Harrington stood to the side, watching with that same smile that never reached her eyes. "Whenever you're ready, dear," she said, voice dripping with false encouragement. Sophia looked out at the audience, at their curious faces, at her father standing in the back with his hands clasped anxiously in front of him. Then she looked at Mrs. Harrington, and in that moment she understood completely what was happening. She was supposed to fail. She was supposed to embarrass herself. That was the point of all this, to show these wealthy people how much their children deserved to be here, and how much someone like her did not. Sophia lifted the violin to her shoulder, positioning it the way Isabel had shown her. She raised the bow, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was from anger as much as fear. She might not know how to play, but she would not give Mrs. Harrington the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. With as much dignity as she could muster, Sophia drew the bow across the strings. The sound that came from Sophia's violin was exactly what everyone expected, harsh, screechy, and painfully amateur. A few people in the audience winced. Someone stifled a laugh. Mrs. Harrington's smile widened ever so slightly. Sophia felt her face burn with shame. She lowered the violin, her eyes finding her father in the back of the room. Miguel stood rigid, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing anger as he began to understand what was happening. "Perhaps that's enough for," Mrs. Harrington began, stepping forward to reclaim the stage. "Wait." The voice came from the back of the room. The audience turned as Hao Li, still in his maintenance uniform, made his way down the center aisle. He looked pale and tired, but his eyes were sharp with purpose. "Mr. Li," Mrs. Harrington said, clearly flustered by his appearance. "I thought you were ill today." "I was," he said simply. "I am better now." He walked onto the stage and approached Sophia. Without speaking, he took the violin from her hands and checked it quickly, his fingers moving with practiced ease over the strings and pegs. "The bridge is misaligned," he said quietly, adjusting it with a small movement, "and it needs rosin." From his pocket he produced a small case from which he took a block of rosin. He quickly ran it over the bow before handing both back to Sophia. "Try again," he said, loud enough for only her to hear. "Remember what I showed you. Just one string at a time." Mrs. Harrington had recovered her composure. "Mr. Li, while we appreciate your dedication to your maintenance duties, we're in the middle of a showcase. Perhaps you could wait until—" "I am not here as maintenance," Mr. Li interrupted, his voice suddenly carrying an authority that silenced the room. "I am here as a teacher." He turned to address the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption. My name is Hao Li. Some of you may know me as the man who fixes your children's instruments when they break them." This drew a few uncomfortable laughs. "What you may not know is that before I came to this country, I was concertmaster for the Beijing Symphony Orchestra for 20 years. A murmur went through the crowd. Mrs. Harrington's smile had completely disappeared. "This young lady," Mr. Li continued, gesturing to Sophia, "has a gift that has gone unnoticed. With your permission, I would like to properly introduce her." Before anyone could object, Mr. Li turned back to Sophia. "Play the open G string," he instructed. Just as we practiced, Sophia, still stunned by his appearance, raised the violin again. This time, when she drew the bow across the lowest string, a clear, resonant note filled the room. It wasn't perfect. There was still a slight scratch to it, but it was miles better than her first attempt. "Now the D string," Mr. Li said. Another note, higher than the first, joined it, the A string. Sophia complied, gaining confidence with each note. And finally, the E string, the highest, brightest note, sang out, and Sophia felt something stir inside her, a strange joy she'd never experienced before. "Now," Mr. Li said, "do you remember the simple scale I showed you yesterday?" Sophia hesitated. "I think so." "Try." Slowly, carefully, Sophia placed her fingers on the strings as Mr. Li had demonstrated, drawing the bow across to produce a simple G major scale. It was rough and uneven with a few missed notes, but recognizable. When she finished, there was silence. Then, to her surprise, applause broke out. Not the polite, obligatory kind from before, but genuine, enthusiastic applause. Sophia looked out at the audience, bewildered. An older man in the front row stood up. "Remarkable progress for a beginner," he said. "How long has she been playing?" Mr. Li smiled. "About 24 hours, Dr. Chen." The man, Dr. Chen, looked genuinely shocked. 24 hours? That's impossible." "I assure you it is not," Mr. Li replied. "Some students have a natural affinity. They just need the right guidance." He turned to Mrs. Harrington, whose face had gone very pale. "Wouldn't you agree, Mrs. Harrington?" The teacher didn't respond. The tension in the room was palpable. Dr. Chen broke it by addressing Sophia directly. Young lady, what made you want to learn the violin? Sophia glanced at her father, then at Mr. Lee before answering. I've been listening to the students practice after school while I help my father clean. I love the sound. It's like the violin can say things that words can't. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. And did the school provide you with lessons as part of this community outreach program Mrs. Harrington mentioned? Sophia looked confused. No, sir, Mr. Lee just showed me how to hold it yesterday. For a few minutes. I see. Dr. Chen turned to Mrs. Harrington. Perhaps you could clarify the nature of this community scholarship program. It seems the execution has been lacking. Mrs. Harrington's professional mask slipped back into place. The program is still in its planning stages, Dr. Chen. Tonight was meant to be more of a demonstration of potential. A demonstration, Dr. Chen repeated flatly. Yes, I believe we've all witnessed that. He turned back to Sophia. Would you be interested in actual lessons, young lady? Not as a demonstration, but as a student? Sophia's eyes widened. Yes, sir. More than anything. Well then, Dr. Chen said, looking around the room at the other donors, I believe I speak for the Chen Family Foundation when I say we would be honored to sponsor a genuine community scholarship. One that provides actual instruction. Several other donors nodded in agreement. Mrs. Harrington looked as if she'd swallowed something sour. That's very generous, Dr. Chen, she managed to say. The school would be most appreciative. Oh, I'm not suggesting the scholarship be administered by the school, Dr. Chen replied smoothly. Given what we've seen tonight, I think direct private instruction would be more appropriate. He looked at Mr. Lee. Would you be interested in taking on a student, Mr. Lee? Properly compensated, of course. Mr. Lee bowed slightly. It would be my privilege. The rest of the showcase proceeded as planned, with the Preston students performing their well-rehearsed pieces. Sophia sat in the audience beside her father, still clutching the borrowed violin, hardly believing what had happened. Did you know, she whispered to her father during a piano sonata, about Mr. Lee being a famous musician? Miguel shook his head. I knew he played, but not that he was so important. How is a private man? He doesn't talk much about his past. After the showcase, while the guests mingled over refreshments, Dr. Chen approached them with Mr. Lee. Mr. Rodriguez, Dr. Chen said, extending his hand to Miguel. Your daughter has a remarkable ear. With proper training, she could go very far. Miguel shook the offered hand, looking both proud and overwhelmed. Thank you, sir. But I don't understand why you would help us. Dr. Chen smiled. Music changed my life, Mr. Rodriguez. I grew up poor in Taiwan. A teacher saw something in me and gave me a chance. Now I can do the same for others. He reached into his pocket and handed Miguel a business card. Call my office tomorrow. We'll arrange everything. As Dr. Chen walked away, Miguel turned to Mr. Lee. How? I don't know how to thank you. Mr. Lee shook his head. No need for thanks between friends, Miguel. I've watched Sophia grow up. I've seen how she listens to the music. He looked down at Sophia. You have a gift, young one, not just for music, but for hearing the heart of things. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep again, but for entirely different reasons. Her mind raced with the possibilities that had opened up before her. She kept hearing that single note she'd played, the high E string, and how it had felt like flying. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Dr. Chen was true to his word. Not only did he arrange for Sophia to have daily lessons with Mr. Lee, but he also provided her with her very own violin. Not an expensive one like the school's Stradivarius replica, but a good quality student instrument that fit her perfectly. Every day after school, instead of helping her father clean, Sophia now went to a small practice room that had been set aside for her lessons. Mr. Lee was a demanding teacher, but never cruel. He pushed her hard because he knew she could take it, and because he recognized in her the same hunger that had driven him as a young man. Again, he would say after she played a scale, your hand position is still not right. The violin must become part of you, not something separate that you fight against. Sophia practiced until her fingers were sore and calloused, until the strange dots on the sheet music began to make sense, until she could play a simple melody without Mr. Lee wincing. Miguel watched his daughter's transformation with quiet pride. She was still his helpful, serious Sophia, but now there was a new light in her eyes, a new purpose in her step. Even on the days when practice was difficult and she came home frustrated, there was a determination about her that hadn't been there before. One evening, about a month after the showcase, Sophia was practicing a simple etude in their small living room when Miguel came home from work earlier than usual. He set down his lunchbox and sat heavily on their worn couch. "Papa," Sophia lowered her violin. "Is everything okay?" Miguel looked tired, but he smiled. "Just some changes at the school. Nothing for you to worry about." "What kind of changes?" He sighed. "Mrs. Harrington is leaving. The school board asked her to resign. Because of what happened at the showcase. Partly that, and partly because," he hesitated, "some of the parents complained about things she'd said to their children. Not nice things." Sophia thought about the way Mrs. Harrington had looked at her, the false smile, the cruel intention behind the opportunity she'd offered. "I'm not sorry she's leaving," Sophia said honestly. "Neither am I," Miguel admitted. "But that's not what I wanted to tell you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This came for you today." Sophia took the envelope. It was made of thick, creamy paper with the Preston Academy logo embossed in gold at the top. Her name was written across the front in elegant script. "What is it?" she asked, running her finger over the expensive paper. "Open it and see." With careful fingers, Sophia broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She read it slowly, her eyes growing wider with each line. "Papa," she whispered, looking up at him in disbelief. "They want me to audition. For a full scholarship, to attend Preston Academy next year." Miguel nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Mr. Lee says you're ready. That you've learned more in a month than most students learn in a year." Sophia looked back at the letter, then at her violin, then at her father. "But what about you? Who will help you after school?" Miguel laughed, a sound full of joy and pride. "I managed for many years before you were old enough to help in Mija. I can manage again." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Your job now is to play your music, to follow this path that has opened up for you." Sophia threw her arms around her father's neck, burying her face against his shoulder. "I love you, Papa. I love you too, Amiha," he whispered, holding her tight. "And your mama would be so proud of you. So very proud." Later that night, Sophia stood by her window, looking out at the city lights. She held her violin, running her fingers over the smooth wood, feeling the strings beneath her fingertips. In just a month, her world had completely changed, all because she'd dared to pick up an instrument that wasn't meant for someone like her. Tomorrow she would tell Mr. Lee about the audition. Tomorrow they would begin preparing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new possibilities. But tonight, in the quiet of her room, Sophia simply held her violin and smiled. The day of the audition arrived faster than Sophia expected. For 6 weeks she had practiced harder than she'd ever worked at anything in her life. Her fingers had developed calluses, then blisters, then stronger calluses. Her shoulders ached from holding the violin for hours. Even in her dreams she heard the pieces Mr. Lee had assigned her. "You're ready," Mr. Lee told her during their final lesson the day before. "But remember, no matter what happens tomorrow, this is just the beginning of your journey." Sophia nodded, though her stomach was already knotting with anxiety. "What if I mess up? What if I forget everything?" Mr. Lee smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Then you will take a breath and continue. Music does not demand perfection, only honesty." Now standing outside the audition room in a simple black dress her father had bought for the occasion, Sophia tried to remember those words. Through the closed door she could hear another student playing. The quick, complicated notes of a piece far more advanced than anything she could attempt. Her father stood beside her, looking almost as nervous as she felt. He had taken the day off work for the first time in years to be here. "You look just like your mother," he said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia looked up at him, surprised. Miguel rarely spoke about her mother, who had died when Sophia was only 5. The pain was still too fresh even after all these years. "She was a fighter too," he continued, "never afraid to go after what she wanted." He straightened Sophia's collar. "No matter what happens in there, I am already so proud of you." The door opened and a girl about Sophia's age emerged, clutching a flute. She looked confident, giving Sophia a brief, curious glance before walking away. A moment later, Mr. Bennett, the orchestra director, appeared in the doorway. "Sophia Rodriguez?" he said, consulting his clipboard. "You're up next." Sophia took a deep breath and picked up her violin case. Her father gave her shoulder a squeeze. "I'll be right here," he promised. Inside the audition room, 3 people sat at a long table: Mr. Bennett, Dr. Chen, and a woman Sophia didn't recognize who had been introduced as Ms. Ortega, the new assistant music director who had replaced Mrs. Harrington. "Good morning, Sophia," Dr. Chen said warmly. "Thank you for coming today. Are you feeling prepared?" Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice. "Excellent," Dr. Chen continued. "The format is simple. You'll play your prepared pieces, and then we might ask you to sight read something simple. Take your time setting up." With shaking hands, Sophia opened her case and began to prepare. She tightened her bow, applied rosin, and carefully lifted out her violin. As she tuned it, she felt her breathing begin to steady. This part was familiar now, a ritual that calmed her nerves. "Whenever you're ready," Mr. Bennett said, pen poised over his evaluation sheet. Sophia positioned the violin under her chin, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to play. The first piece was a simple etude that Mr. Lee had chosen to showcase her technical progress. Not flashy, but demanding precise finger placement and bow control. As she played the opening measures, the practice room fell away. There was only the music, the feeling of the strings beneath her fingers, the vibration of the notes against her collarbone. When she finished the etude, she moved directly into her second piece without pausing, a folk melody that Mr. Lee had arranged for her. It was the piece she loved most, with its bittersweet melody that reminded her of her mother's favorite songs. As the final note faded, Sophia lowered her violin and looked at the panel. Dr. Chen was smiling. Ms. Ortega was writing something on her notepad. Mr. Bennett's expression was unreadable. "That was lovely. Sophia," Dr. Chen said, "now would you mind trying a little sight reading?" Mr. Bennett placed a single sheet of music on the stand in front of her. Sophia studied it anxiously. The notes were simple enough, a basic melody without complicated rhythms, but sight reading was still new to her. She'd only been reading music for 6 weeks. "Take a moment to look it over," Ms. Ortega suggested kindly. "No rush," Sophia nodded gratefully. She hummed the melody softly to herself, tapping out the rhythm with her foot as Mr. Lee had taught her. Then she raised her violin and began to play. She made several mistakes, missing a sharp sign in the third measure, rushing through a quarter note that should have been held longer. But she kept going, remembering Mr. Lee's advice about not stopping for errors. When she finished, she lowered her violin again, bracing herself for criticism. "Thank you, Sophia," Mr. Bennett said, making a final note on his sheet. "That will be all for today. We'll be in touch within the week." Sophia packed up her violin, thanked the panel, and walked out of the room on legs that felt like jelly. Her father was waiting exactly where she'd left him, his face anxious. "How did it go?" he asked immediately. "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "I made some mistakes in the sight reading part, but I think the other parts were okay." Miguel hugged her tightly. "You did your best. That's all anyone can ask." The next week was the longest of Sophia's life. She continued her lessons with Mr. Lee, who refused to let her slack off while waiting for the results. "Whether you get into Preston or not, you are a musician now," he told her firmly, "and musicians practice every day." Finally, on Friday afternoon, Miguel came home from work with another cream-colored envelope bearing the Preston Academy seal. Sophia was practicing scales and nearly dropped her violin when she saw it. "It came to the school office," Miguel explained, handing it to her. "Open it." This time, Sophia's hands were steady as she broke the seal. She unfolded the letter and read it silently, her expression giving nothing away. "Well?" Miguel asked, unable to bear the suspense. Sophia looked up, her eyes shining. "I got in," she whispered. "Full scholarship for 4 years." Miguel let out a whoop of joy and lifted Sophia off her feet, spinning her around the small living room. "I knew it! I knew you could do it." That weekend, they celebrated with a special dinner. Mr. Lee joined them, bringing a bottle of sparkling cider and a small gift wrapped in red paper. "For you," he said, handing the package to Sophia. "A tradition in my country for new beginnings." Inside was a beautiful carved wooden box. When Sophia opened it, she found a collection of rosin, spare strings, and a small jade charm in the shape of a music note. "For luck," Mr. Lee explained, "though you have already made your own luck through hard work." The summer passed in a blur of preparation. Sophia continued her daily lessons, pushing herself harder now that she knew she would be joining students who had been playing for years. Dr. Chen's foundation provided not only for her tuition, but also for her uniform, books and a new violin, still not as expensive as the school's Stradivarius, but a significant upgrade from her student model. It will grow with you, Mr. Lee explained as he helped her try it out. A good instrument is like a good friend. It challenges you to be better. As August drew to a close, Sophia's nerves returned. Starting a new school was daunting enough, but starting at Preston Academy as the janitor's daughter on a special scholarship felt overwhelming. What if they don't accept me? She asked her father one evening, as she tried on her uniform for the final fitting. The navy blue blazer with the Preston crest felt foreign on her shoulders. Some won't, Miguel answered honestly. There will always be people who think they know who you are based on where you come from. But you'll find friends who see you for yourself. The night before her first day, Sophia couldn't sleep. She stood by her window again, looking out at the city lights, her new violin in her hands. Tomorrow she would walk through the front doors of Preston Academy as a student, not as the girl who helped clean up after hours. She thought about how much had changed in just a few months, how a moment meant to humiliate her had instead opened a door she never knew existed, how music had given her a voice she didn't know she had. When morning came, Sophia was ready. She put on her uniform carefully, braided her hair neatly, and packed her violin case alongside her new textbooks. Miguel had arranged his schedule to drive her to school for her first day, though they'd agreed she would take the bus after that. Remember who you are, he told her as they pulled up to the imposing entrance. Not just where you come from, but who you choose to be. Sophia nodded, gathering her courage. I'll see you after school, Papa. Not in the maintenance office, he reminded her with a smile. In the pickup line with all the other parents. Sophia walked through the front doors of Preston Academy, her violin case clutched tightly in one hand. The marble entrance hall that she had cleaned so many times looked different somehow from this perspective. Students in identical uniforms milled about, greeting friends after the summer break. Comparing schedules, she found her assigned locker and was figuring out the combination when she heard a familiar voice. You made it. Sophia turned to see Isabel, the girl who had helped her at the showcase. Up close, without the tension of that night, Sophia could see that her eyes were kind behind her glasses. I did, Sophia replied, unsure what else to say. Good, Isabel said with a nod. The violin section needs more people who actually care about music. She glanced at Sophia's schedule, which was sitting on top of her books. We have theory together first period. Want to walk over? Sophia nodded, surprised and relieved to have found a friendly face so quickly. As they walked to class, Isabel pointed out important landmarks, the cafeteria, the practice rooms, the shortcuts between buildings. Most of the teachers are okay, she explained. Mr. Bennett is strict but fair, and Miss Ortega is actually really nice even though she looks serious all the time. They reached the music theory classroom and found seats together near the front. Other students filed in, some giving Sophia curious looks. A few whispered behind their hands when they saw her. Ignore them, Isabel advised quietly. They'll get over it once they hear you play. Mr. Bennett entered the room and the class fell silent. He took attendance, pausing briefly when he reached Sophia's name on the list. She raised her hand, meeting his gaze steadily. Welcome to Preston Academy, Ms. Rodriguez, he said with a small nod. We're glad to have you join us. As the lesson began, Sophia opened her notebook and picked up her pencil. The musical notation on the board already looked familiar after her summer of intensive study. She began to take notes, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She was here. Against all odds, she was really here. And this was just the beginning. The first semester at Preston Academy was harder than anything Sophia had ever experienced. While her musical talent had earned her a place, she quickly discovered that she was behind in almost every other subject. Years of attending an underfunded public school had left gaps in her education that became glaringly obvious in Preston's rigorous academic environment. I don't think I can do this, she confessed to her father one night after spending hours struggling with an algebra assignment. Everyone else seems to know things I've never even heard of. Miguel looked up from the dinner he was preparing. Is that the Sophia I know talking? The one who learned to play violin in 6 weeks? Sophia sighed, pushing her textbook away. That's different. Music makes sense to me. These equations don't. Then you'll find a way to make them make sense, Miguel said simply. Just like you did with music. Finding that way meant asking for help, something Sophia had never been comfortable doing. But when Ms. Ortega noticed her struggling in music theory, she suggested Sophia join the peer tutoring program. "There's no shame in needing support," Ms. Ortega told her. "Many of our students have been preparing for Preston's curriculum since kindergarten. You're doing the equivalent of climbing a mountain while they took the ski lift." So 3 afternoons a week, Sophia stayed late for tutoring sessions. Her algebra tutor was a senior named David, whose patience and clear explanations gradually helped the numbers and variables form patterns that Sophia could understand. For literature, she worked with a quiet girl named Lily, who showed her how to analyze text for deeper meaning. Between classes, homework, tutoring, and daily violin practice, Sophia had little time for anything else. But slowly, surely, she began to catch up. Her first progress report showed mostly C's, with an A in music and a B in Spanish, the only subject where her background gave her an advantage. "It's a good start," Mr. Lee told her during one of their weekly lessons, which continued despite her now being an official student. Progress, not perfection. As fall turned to winter, Sophia found her place in the orchestra. She wasn't first chair, not even close, but Mr. Bennett had placed her in the middle of the second violin section, where she could both contribute and learn from the more experienced players around her. Isabel, who played first violin, often stayed after rehearsal to help Sophia with difficult passages. Their friendship had grown steadily since that first day, though Sophia was still too busy for the weekend mall trips and movie nights that filled Isabel's social calendar. "You work too hard," Isabel told her after orchestra practice one day in December. "You need to have some fun sometimes." Sophia shrugged as she packed up her violin. "I can't afford to have as much fun as everyone else. I have to prove I deserve to be here." Isabel frowned. "That's not true. Your scholarship isn't conditional on you killing yourself with work." "Maybe not officially," Sophia replied, "but you know how it is. People are watching me, waiting for me to fail." She didn't have to explain who people were. Though most students and teachers had been welcoming or at least neutral, there were still those who viewed her as an interloper. Thomas, the boy who had reluctantly lent her his violin at the showcase, was one of the worst. As concertmaster of the orchestra, he never missed an opportunity to point out her mistakes during rehearsals. "He's just threatened," Isabel said dismissively. "Everyone heard about how quickly you've progressed. He's afraid you'll take his spot eventually." The winter concert provided Sophia's first real opportunity to perform as part of the Preston Academy Orchestra. Her father took the night off work to attend, sitting somewhat awkwardly among the wealthy parents in the auditorium. Mr. Lee came too, his face beaming with pride as he watched from the back row. The orchestra played beautifully, performing holiday classics and more challenging pieces with equal skill. Sophia's fingers moved confidently over the strings, her ears attuned to the musicians around her, adjusting her volume and timing to blend perfectly with the section. When the final piece ended, the audience erupted in applause. As Sophia stood with the rest of the orchestra to take a bow, she caught her father's eye in the crowd. He was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt, his face shining with unshed tears. Backstage after the concert, Dr. Chen approached Sophia as she was packing up her violin. "That was wonderful, Sophia," he said warmly. "Your progress has been remarkable." "Thank you, sir," she replied, still a little shy around the man who had changed her life so dramatically. "I've been practicing a lot, so I've heard," Dr. Chen said with a smile. "In fact, I've heard so many good things that I wanted to discuss a special opportunity with you." He explained that every year, the Chen Family Foundation sponsored a young musician to attend an intensive summer program at a prestigious music camp in the mountains. The program brought together promising students from across the country for 6 weeks of advanced instruction and performance opportunities. "It's very competitive," Dr. Chen cautioned, "and you would be competing against students with many more years of training. But Mr. Lee and Mr. Bennett both think you're ready for the challenge." Sophia's mind raced. A summer music camp sounded like a dream come true. 6 weeks of nothing but music, surrounded by other passionate students. But there was a problem. "I usually help my father during the summer," she said hesitantly. "He picks up extra shifts and I—" "Your father and I have already discussed this," Dr. Chen interrupted gently. "He is very supportive of the idea." That night, when Sophia asked her father about it, Miguel confirmed what Dr. Chen had said. "Of course you should go," he insisted. "This is an amazing opportunity. But what about the extra money we save during the summer?" Sophia pressed. My job at the grocery store helps with rent. Miguel sat down beside her on their small couch. Sophia, listen to me. When your mother and I came to this country, we had dreams for you, dreams that you would have opportunities we never had. He took her hands in his. This is exactly what we hoped for. Don't worry about the money. I've been given more hours at the school, and Mrs. Vega next door needs someone to watch her kids 3 afternoons a week. Sophia nodded, feeling both excited and guilty. Her father worked so hard already. Taking on more hours seemed unfair. I'll get a job when I come back, she promised. And I'll work twice as hard next summer. Miguel smiled. First, focus on getting accepted to this camp. Then we'll talk about next summer. The audition for the summer program was scheduled for February. Sophia threw herself into preparation, practicing harder than ever before. Mr. Lee selected a challenging piece that would showcase both her technical progress and her emotional depth. The first movement of Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor. This is far beyond what most students attempt after only 8 months, he warned. But I believe you can do it. Not perfectly, but with heart. And sometimes heart is more important than perfection. The day of the audition, Sophia woke before dawn to practice one more time. By now, her fingers knew the notes by memory, dancing across the strings with growing confidence. The trills and runs that had seemed impossible a month ago now flowed naturally. When she arrived at the audition room, she was surprised to find not just a panel of judges but a small audience as well. Dr. Chen was there, along with several people she didn't recognize, representatives from the summer program, she guessed. Her father had wanted to come, but she'd insisted he couldn't miss work for this. To her shock, Thomas was just finishing his audition as she entered. He played the final triumphant notes of a Paganini caprice, his technique flawless. The judges applauded politely as he bowed. As he passed Sophia on his way out, he smirked. Good luck following that, janitor's girl. The old Sophia might have been intimidated. But the girl who had survived nearly a full year at Preston Academy, who had caught up in her classes through sheer determination, who had practiced until her fingers bled and then practiced more, that Sophia just smiled back. Thank you, Thomas. I'll do my best. When her name was called, Sophia walked to the center of the room with her head held high. She introduced herself and her piece, then took a deep breath and began to play. From the first note, she knew this performance was different. There was a freedom in her playing that hadn't been there before, as if the music was flowing through her rather than from her. The technical challenges that had seemed so daunting during practice now felt like a dance, difficult, but joyful. When she reached the cadenza, the most technically demanding part of the piece, she closed her eyes and let go of everything except the music. Her bow flew across the strings, her fingers finding each note perfectly. In that moment, she wasn't the janitor's daughter or the scholarship student or the girl who had learned to play as a joke. She was just Sophia, and the music was her voice. As the final note resonated through the room, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the applause began, not polite and measured like for Thomas, but spontaneous and genuine. Sophia opened her eyes to see one of the judges wiping away a tear. The results wouldn't be announced for 2 weeks, but as Sophia packed up her violin, Dr. Chen approached her with a wide smile. I think we both know how that went, he said quietly. Start packing for summer. 5 years later, Sophia stood in the wings of a much larger stage. The Cleveland Youth Orchestra, one of the most prestigious in the country, was performing their spring concert. As first violin soloist, Sophia would be featured in Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons. She peered out at the packed auditorium. In the front row, her father sat beside Mr. Lee, both of them dressed in their best suits. Beside them was Dr. Chen, who had continued to support her education through high school and now into her first year at the conservatory. And in the very last row, barely visible in the dim light, sat Mrs. Harrington. Sophia had been surprised to see her name on the ticket list. After leaving Preston Academy, the former teacher had moved to another state, but apparently she had returned just for this performance. As Sophia walked onto the stage to take her position, the audience applauded. She adjusted her violin, not a borrowed one or a student model, but her very own instrument, earned through years of scholarships and competition prizes. The conductor raised his baton and Sophia lifted her bow. As she began to play the familiar, joyful notes of spring, she glanced once more at the back row. Mrs. Harrington was watching intently, her expression unreadable. Sophia smiled to herself and turned her attention back to the music. The joke that was meant to humiliate her had instead revealed her gift to the world. And now, with every note she played, she proved what Mr. Lee had told her from the beginning, that talent could be found in the most unexpected places, if only someone took the time to listen. The music soared through the concert hall, lifting hearts and bringing smiles to faces. And in that moment, as her violin sang out clear and true, Sofia Rodriguez was exactly where she was always meant to be.